Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing who's out there with me. I want to start by saying something I've never said out loud before. For most of my life, I believed that if you loved someone completely and without condition, they would love you the same way in return. I believed that sacrifice was its own kind of promise. That if you gave everything you had to another person, your time, your savings, your dignity, your years, they would never let you fall. I was 63 years old before I learned how wrong I was. My name is Dorothy, and this is the story of the worst night of my life and what came after it. I was tired in the particular way that only grandmothers understand, the kind of tired that lives in your feet and your lower back and somewhere behind your eyes. I had driven 4 hours from Knoxville to Nashville for my son's annual dinner party, the kind of dinner where the wine costs more than my electric bill and nobody actually eats the food on their plate. My son Michael had called me 3 weeks before and said, "Mom, you have to be there. Margaret's parents will be there. I need you there." He said he needed me. I wrote it on my calendar in red ink. I had pressed my best blouse, the navy one with the pearl buttons that I bought on sale at Dillard's 2 Christmases ago. I had my hair done at the salon on Wednesday, which I do not do often because it costs $40 I usually don't spend on myself. I brought a lemon pound cake I made from scratch because I always bring food to places I'm not sure I belong. I parked on the street because the driveway was full of cars I didn't recognize, BMWs and a black Range Rover. I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel and I told myself, "You belong here. This is your son's home. You painted the nursery in this house when he bought it. You watched your grandson take his first steps in that front yard." I rang the doorbell at 7:15. The woman who answered was not my daughter-in-law. She was someone I'd never seen before, young, wearing a black dress, clearly some kind of hired staff. She looked at me with polite confusion. "Can I help you?" "I'm Dorothy," I said. "Michael's mother." She smiled, the practiced smile of someone doing a job. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't have you on the guest list. Let me check with Mr. Hargrove." She left me standing on the porch, my son's porch, where I hung a wreath every Christmas for 6 years. I stood there long enough to hear laughter from inside. Someone telling a story. The clink of glasses. Michael's laugh, the one I know better than any sound in the world because I heard it for the first time in a delivery room in 1985 when he was 7 pounds and 4 ounces and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The door opened again and it was Michael. He was wearing a charcoal blazer and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and he stepped outside and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. "Mom!" His voice was low, controlled. "Hi, sweetheart." I held up the pound cake. "I made the lemon one. I know it's your favorite." He looked at the cake. He looked at me. He looked at my blouse, my hair, my car parked on the street. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." I knew before he said another word. The way you know a storm is coming even before the sky changes color. Some part of me had always known this moment was a possibility and had simply refused to look at it directly. Margaret's parents are inside. Her father is Gerald Whitfield. He just made partner at the largest investment firm in Tennessee. "These are important people, Mom. This dinner has been 6 months in the making." "I know," I said. "You told me. That's why I came." "I told you the wrong thing." He exhaled. "I should have been clearer. Tonight isn't a family dinner, it's a professional event. And I think it would be better if you—" "If I what, Michael?" He couldn't look at me. "My son, who I taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of First Baptist on a Saturday morning. My son, whose college application essay I proofread 4 times. My son, whose rental properties I managed for 3 years after his first property manager quit, doing it for free because he said he was stretched thin, and I said, 'Don't worry, I'll help. I think it would be better if you came another time.'" I stood on that porch for what felt like a very long time. The pound cake was getting heavy in my hands. "Does Margaret know you called me and told me to come?" "I'll explain everything to you later, Mom, I promise." "Does she know?" He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. I handed him the pound cake. He took it automatically, the way you take something someone hands you before you've decided if you want it. I walked back down the porch steps. I got in my car. I drove 3 blocks before I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road. I sat on a side street in Nashville with my forehead against the steering wheel, and I cried the way I haven't cried since my mother's funeral. Not for the dinner party. Not even for the humiliation. I cried because I finally understood something I should have understood years ago. My son had been ashamed of me for a long time, and tonight he had simply stopped pretending otherwise. I had $78 in my checking account. I had driven 4 hours on a quarter tank of gas because I topped off in Cookeville thinking I'd fill up properly once I got to Nashville, and Michael would cover it the way he sometimes did. My phone was at 11%. I had no overnight bag because I was supposed to stay in Michael's guest room. I went through my purse the way you do when you're desperate, the specific, methodical search of someone who knows they're looking for something that probably isn't there. I found a lipstick, a grocery receipt, 2 quarters, a pack of tissues, a CVS rewards card. And at the very bottom of the inside zipper pocket, tucked behind an old insurance card, I found a business card. It was my father's. Harold Gene Watkins. Watkins Precision Engineering. The address was in Memphis. The phone number had 7 digits, which means it was printed before area codes became standard on cards. The cardstock was cream-colored and slightly soft at the corners from age. My father had been gone for 11 years. I had no idea how this card had ended up in my purse. I must have transferred it from an old wallet without noticing, the way we carry the dead with us without always meaning to. My father was a mechanical engineer. He worked for himself for the last 20 years of his life, out of a workshop behind our house in Memphis. He had a drafting table and a wall of technical books and a coffee can full of pencils that he sharpened by hand. He talked about tolerances and load-bearing ratios at the dinner table. My mother pretended to follow along. I actually did. I used to sit in that workshop on Saturday mornings and watch him draw. His hands were so precise. He could hold a compass perfectly still and draw a circle freehand that looked machined. He used to say, "Dorothy, an idea that lives only in your head is just a dream. An idea you write down is a plan. An idea you build is a legacy." I had not thought about that workshop in years. I sat there on that dark side street in Nashville with my father's business card in my hand, and I thought about what it means to have nothing. I had $78. I had 11% battery. I had a navy blouse with pearl buttons and nowhere to sleep. And I had this card. I don't know why I did what I did next. I have thought about it many times since, and I still can't explain it as logic. It was something else. It was the same instinct that makes you reach for a railing in the dark. You don't decide to do it. Your hand just goes. I typed the name on the card into my phone. Watkins Precision Engineering, Memphis. It had been dissolved years ago. Of course, my father had no one to leave it to, or so we all believed. But under the business listing, there was a related result. A law firm in Memphis, Callaway and Associates, patent and intellectual property law, with a note that said, "Successor counsel for certain legacy matters related to Watkins Engineering. Inquiries welcome." I stared at that for a long time. It was 8:45 at night. The law firm was obviously closed. But they had a contact form on their website. I typed it out on my phone with my thumbs, the way you do when you're too tired to care how it sounds. I wrote, "My name is Dorothy Watkins Hargrove. Harold Watkins was my father. I found his business card tonight, and I don't know why I'm writing to you except that I have nowhere else to go. I don't know what legacy matters means, but I would like to know. My number is below." I pressed submit, and my phone died. I slept in my car that night in a Walgreens parking lot because it was well lit and I felt safer there than on a side street. I am 63 years old, and I slept in my car in a parking lot in Nashville, Tennessee. I want you to hold that image for a moment, because it matters. In the morning, I bought a phone charger from inside the Walgreens. I bought a coffee and a banana. That was $14.37. I had $63 left. There were 2 missed calls from a Memphis area code. I called back from the Walgreens parking lot, standing next to my car in the morning sun, still in yesterday's navy blouse. The man who answered said his name was Charles Callaway. He said he had been waiting for me, or someone like me, for several years. He said he had been appointed by a probate court to manage certain intellectual property assets belonging to Harold Watkins's estate, and that because my father died without a clear will and the assets were technical in nature, they had been held in a kind of legal suspension waiting for a qualified heir to come forward. I said, "What assets?" There was a pause. Not a hesitation, more like the pause of a man choosing his words carefully because he understands their weight. He said, "Mrs. Hargrove, your father filed 11 patents between 1974 and 1991. 3 of them were licensed to manufacturers and have been generating royalties for decades. 2 others are foundational to components currently used in aerospace manufacturing. We've been administering the royalty accounts, but the principal rights and the accumulated value, we were not able to transfer those without a direct heir." I sat down on the curb next to my car. "How much?" I said. "I'd like you to come in before we discuss specific figures," he said. "But I will tell you that we've been holding a significant sum in trust, and the ongoing royalties from the active licenses are substantial." I drove to Memphis that morning, 4 hours in the opposite direction from home. I had $63 and a dead father's business card and nothing else to lose. The law office of Callaway & Associates was in a 4-story building on Madison Avenue in Memphis, 6 blocks from the Mississippi River. Charles Callaway met me in the lobby. He was in his 60s himself, with wire-rimmed glasses and the quiet, careful manner of someone who has spent his career handling other people's most important moments. He shook my hand and said he was very glad I had found them. He showed me into a conference room. There was a file on the table that was 3 inches thick. He opened it and began to explain. My father had been, it turned out, more than a careful draftsman with a coffee can of pencils. He had developed a series of load distribution mechanisms, his phrase, which I remembered from those Saturday mornings that addressed specific failure points in industrial equipment. He was not the kind of inventor who built flashy things. He built solutions to problems that other engineers hadn't solved cleanly. He was meticulous, and he was private, and he did not talk about money. 3 of his patents had been licensed to a manufacturing company in Ohio in 1988. That company was later acquired twice. The current parent company had been paying royalties into the estate account for 31 years. Charles turned a page in the file and slid it across the table to me. I looked at the number. I have thought many times about how to describe what I felt in that moment. It was not joy. It was not triumph. It was something more complicated and more quiet. It was the feeling of understanding, all at once, something that had been true for a very long time without your knowledge, like learning that someone loved you before you knew they existed. My father had been providing for me across 11 years of death and silence. The accumulated royalties in the trust account were $1.4 million. The ongoing royalty payments from the 2 active aerospace licenses were approximately $90,000 per year. And Charles had reason to believe that one of the aerospace manufacturers was due for a licensing renegotiation within the next 18 months. Given how central my father's mechanism had become to their current product line, who knew about this? I asked. Your father knew. He updated the estate paperwork in 2009 to name you specifically as sole heir to the IP assets, separate from other estate matters. But he passed in 2012 before finalizing a clear will for his physical assets, so it fell into probate. The IP side was cleaner, you were named, but we couldn't locate you for several years, and then when we did, your contact information kept changing. My contact information changed, I said slowly, because for 3 years I was helping my son manage his rental properties, and I moved in with him temporarily to save money. Charles looked at me over his glasses. He said nothing. He did not need to. I want to tell you something about the following weeks, because I think people imagine that a moment like that one, the moment the number is on the table, changes everything instantly, like a light switch. It doesn't. It takes time for your body to believe what your mind has been told. I drove back to Knoxville that night and I sat in my apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment that I had lived in for 4 years and decorated with care, and that I had always been quietly ashamed of when Michael came to visit. And I did not feel powerful. I felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has finally been told they can stop. But there are things I need to tell you about what happened next. Michael called me the following Tuesday. He had heard something from somewhere, I still don't know how, though I have my suspicions about a cousin who I may have mentioned something to in passing. He called with the warmth of a man who has reevaluated a situation. He wanted to take me to lunch. He said he had been thinking about that evening, about how he handled things, and he wanted to make it right. I met him for lunch. I wore my good blazer, not the Dillard's blouse, the actual good one that I had bought for my sister's funeral and had never worn since. I wore my mother's earrings. I ordered the salmon. He was charming. He has always been charming. I raised him to have good manners and he has them, selectively. He apologized. He said he had been under pressure. He said Margaret's father had made certain comments about appearances and he had panicked. He said it would never happen again. I let him finish. Then I told him that I was in the process of establishing a foundation in my father's name, Harold G. Watkins Engineering Scholarship Foundation, for first-generation college students pursuing degrees in mechanical and structural engineering. I told him I had retained a patent attorney and a financial advisor. I told him I had put a deposit on a house in East Memphis, 3 blocks from the Mississippi River, with a backyard large enough for a workshop. He stared at me. "Mom, I'd also like to discuss the 3 years I managed your rental properties," I said. Charles tells me that informal management agreements of that nature, when one party was providing substantial labor without compensation based on an implied promise of future consideration, can have legal standing. "Are you, Mom? Are you threatening to sue me?" "I'm having a conversation," I said. "The way you wanted to. Over lunch. I want to be fair to my son because fairness is something I still believe in, even now." We did not go to court. We reached an understanding. He agreed to compensate me for the 3 years of property management work at the standard market rate for the work performed. The amount was more than he expected. It was less than I could have pursued legally. It was enough. He also agreed to speak honestly to his wife's parents about who I am. Not an embarrassment. Not a complication. Dorothy Watkins Hargrove, daughter of Harold Watkins of Memphis, Tennessee. A woman who raised her son on one income after his father left, who learned basic accounting to manage her son's properties, who drove 4 hours for a dinner party she wasn't allowed to attend, who slept in a Walgreens parking lot and still had enough sense to make a phone call in the morning. I moved into the East Memphis house in March. It has 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen and hardwood floors that creak in a way I already love. In the backyard, I have built a workshop. It is smaller than my father's was. Because I am not an engineer, I cannot do what he did. But I have a drafting table that I bought at an estate sale, and I have a wall where I am putting up technical books that I'm only beginning to understand, and I have a coffee can on the windowsill that I fill with pencils. I keep his business card in a frame above the drafting table, cream-colored cardstock, soft at the corners. Harold Gene Watkins, Watkins Precision Engineering. The first scholarship recipient of the Watkins Foundation enrolled at the University of Tennessee last fall. Her name is Amara. She is 19 years old and she wants to design bridges. She reminds me of no one so much as the girl I used to be, the girl who sat in her father's workshop on Saturday mornings and learned that an idea you build is a legacy. I think about that night in Nashville sometimes. The porch, the pound cake, the sound of laughter from inside a house where I was not wanted. I think about who I was in that parking lot, $78, 11% battery, a good blouse, and nowhere to sleep. I don't think about it with bitterness. Not anymore. I think about it with something that has taken me a while to name, and what I've landed on is this: gratitude. Not for the humiliation, not for any of what Michael did, but for the fact that being pushed to the bottom of a purse made me find something I'd been carrying without knowing it. My father had been quietly, patiently, methodically providing for me across years and silence and death, the same way he used to sit at his drafting table and solve problems that wouldn't reveal themselves until decades later. He always said an idea that lives only in your head is just a dream. He put his ideas on paper, he built them into metal, he filed them in a courthouse and named me in the paperwork and trusted that I would eventually need them and eventually find them. I found them on the worst night of my life, at the bottom of my purse, in a parking lot in Nashville. I would like you to remember something. If you take nothing else from this story, the people who love you most do not always announce it. They do not always say it at the dinner table or write it in cards or show up when you expect them. Sometimes they love you in the quiet and careful language of someone who is building something for you before you know you'll need it. Sometimes the most important thing anyone has ever done for you is waiting in a place you haven't looked yet. Look in the places you haven't looked. Thank you for being here with me today. If this story moved you, please leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you know someone who is going through a hard season right now, someone who feels pushed out and forgotten, please share this with them. Not because it will fix what they're going through, but because sometimes it helps to know that the worst night is not the last night. I'll see you in the next one.